Hello everybody and welcome. We are going to give it a few more moments for all of the attendees to join the call and let the numbers stack up, and then we will get started. So good morning. If you're joining us from America, like two of our speakers, good afternoon if you're in Europe, like a lot of our audience, and indeed good evening if you're other parts of the world, such as South Africa. So it's great to have so many people on the call, and I think we are just about ready to get started. So hello everybody and welcome to the 7th episode of our Tandem Talks. And for those of you that are new to joining our community today, our Tandem Talks is a content webinar series that takes place once a month, and it's where we invite thought leaders, business leaders and HR leaders to join us and share their expertise and their insights. Today, we are delighted to be joined by two wonderful ladies, Tamra Chandler and Laura Grealish. Tamra being a partner of EY and Laura being the senior manager at EY. And importantly, them both being the co-authors of the book, Feedback and Other Dirty Words, Why We Fear It and How to Fix It. Today, Tamra and Laura are going to be talking to us about why and how to fuel our performance and feedback strategies in trust. We'd love this to be an interactive session, so please feel free to put your comments and questions in the chat box below, and the session will be moderated by the CEO of our Tandem, Aisling Tayar. This webinar will be being recorded, so I'm going to send the recording out tomorrow, and please feel free to share it with your network so that we can spread the word with all this wonderful content. And that's all from me. I know it's a jam-packed session full of content, so I'm now going to hand it over to you. And thanks for joining the call, and I hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Meg, and hello to everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm so excited to have not one, but two of the authors of my absolute favorite book on feedback and Other Dirty Words. If you care in any way about the topic of feedback, you're going to love this book. It's really, really excellent. And there's just so much insight to be had. So I can't wait to get stuck in, and I'm particularly happy that we are tackling the area of trust, because it is one of those things, isn't it, that is the golden thread of every effective working relationship, but can be hard to quantify or measure, so sometimes becomes the neglected poor cousin of other concepts. But I think it's super important, and let's take the scientific view. So ladies, tell me, what's neuroscience saying about the benefits and the importance of trust?
Good morning from the U.S. Thank you, Aisling, for that nice introduction. I'm Laura, and Tamara is indeed my partner in crime on this book and all things feedback. So, gosh, I'm going to share my screen so y'all can see it. And tell me when I do it right, are you able to see the big word trust?
We are indeed.
When Aisling asked us to talk about kind of the neuroscience aspect, I immediately went to a disclaimer, which is we are not neuroscientists. Tamara and I are a couple of cheeky broads who wrote a book in the US and had a lot of fun doing it, but we leaned into the science. And even since the publishing of the book, the science I'm going to talk to you about today is authored by a neuroscientist in the US called Paul Zak. And he actually led a number of studies over the last 10 years that can physically measure the amount of trust that a human being has with another human being, and ultimately can kind of predict the trust in organizations. And the whole neuroscience thing, just to break it down for us non-scientists, is this. There's a chemical called oxytocin in the brain. And Paul Zak and his researchers found that this chemical in lab rats was found to allow, when there was a lot of it, the rats felt comfortable approaching another rat. So, well over 10 years ago, they started studying this chemical generation in humans to see what might generate trust or fear in humans. All comes down to this chemical generated by the human brain called oxytocin. And what they found is fabulous, is that trust can be generated by certain behaviors, certain processes that we recommend in performance management. And the bottom line is this, that trust really is everything. Low trust companies versus high trust companies. And they can measure, you can measure, people say, I feel trusting in this organization or not. People in high trust organizations, they actually say that they feel 74% less stress on the daily, 106% more energy in the organization. Like you were talking about performance management, performance strategies. Who doesn't want that? 50% more productivity, 60% more joy right now. I mean, could we use that right now? 70% of the people in higher trust feeling companies and lower feel 70% more aligned to the organization's purpose. We know that, being productive is all about being aligned to the purpose. And those high trust companies also enjoy 50% more retention and loyalty. So it's pretty significant neuroscience, the habits and the processes that generate trust. We think it's pretty profound.
Yeah. I mean, it feels almost to the point of a no-brainer, doesn't it? That you've got to work trust into your performance strategies and feedback, because if you're going to get these kind of results, as you say, who doesn't want that, particularly at the moment? But it's been hard to generate that trust. And I think a lot of the time, traditionally, performance management and feedback in particular, it's more associated with eroding trust than it is building trust. I think a lot of us have those feedback experiences or performance management moments that really disappointed and eroded trust between managers and employees. Can we flip it? Can we turn that around? Or any thoughts about how we could?
It's so true, Ashlyn, because we, when we look at performance management in the first book, How Performance Management is Killing Performance and What to Do About It, the first fatal flaw we say of performance management is it's not actually driving performance. And when you look at why traditional performance management isn't driving performance, it gets back to all of these statistics, the engagement, the connection, the joy. Instead, we're often seeing disengagement, disappointment, frustration, all those types of things coming out of the traditional models. Well, why is that? Well, trust and transparency are sort of right at the heart of it. And you can think about it, there's sort of the systemic reason, and then there's the individual reason. And I think if you look at the systemic reason, a lot of the traditional programs or approaches that we've taken have been kind of a black box. Employees sort of work through the year, they kind of do their thing, and then suddenly at the end, a rating comes shooting out of the box, or, there's like something happens and suddenly decisions have been made, and those employees don't understand. They don't understand how they influenced it or what control they had, what they did right or wrong. It's a little bit, maybe not a little bit, it's pretty opaque. That's kind of the systemic level. Then at the individual level, because we adopt practices that a lot of us were trained on, the 3 ups and 3 downs. I always have to tell you 3 things you're doing wrong, right? There's a lot of practices that we have embedded into these processes that are at the heart of losing that trust between individuals, often the manager and the employee, but even, can be in other mechanisms. If there's calibrations happening where leaders are arguing over rankings or ratings or comp decisions, right? All these things start to create competition, animosity, and break down that trust. So there's just, sadly, in the systems we've built and in the mechanisms we've deployed, we've actually created more fear, and we've lost that trust.
Yeah. It was probably one of the most frustrating moments of the year. I remember when I was in a HRD role, when an employee would come and go, my manager told me he wanted to give me this rating, but he had to give me this rating because, HR told him, or they got wind of calibration, which was all done behind closed doors or what have you.
Right.
So even the managers couldn't hold up the
Yeah.
process in front of the employees, which hugely eroded trust in the whole organization
Oh,
and the way we
absolutely.
practiced it.
Right.
Right. And
Absolutely.
you know, back like Tamara was saying, we didn't know what we didn't know. Managers all over the world, when we talk about it and they say, oh, I was trained to do what we
Yeah.
call in the book, I can't cuss on the webinar, can I? Or the poo sandwich, right? In the book, we
It's
call
okay,
it.
we can edit.
But you know, managers, we were trained a certain way because you know what? We didn't have the science backing things up that say, you know what? We know better now. The human brain operates a different way. All those processes and procedures and the way we were trained, we didn't know better. But now the science, if anything, this year, didn't we learn this year, listen to the science?
Yeah.
And so now the science will tell us, gosh, those habits and behaviors that we have as an individual or like Tamara says, as an organization, they can't be changed. They're just ingrained and we knew what we knew back then and now we know better. And there
Yeah.
are ways to flip it.
Yeah, yeah. So we like to make this a community event. So let's get some thoughts from the audience. Meg, if you'd share the poll right now, let's see what's happening out there in the real world of your organization. So if you could answer this to give us just a sense or a gauge of what's happening out there, how well do you think right now your current performance strategies inspire or create an environment of trust and transparency? And if you could select from one of the multi-choice, it'll give us a sense of where people think their organizations are at. So I'll give you a second to fill that out and Meg will share the poll with us when she gets some votes in.
Very exciting.
So here it is.
Oh
Oh,
my
wow. Oh, there's a lot of people need some work. Okay. All right. So 77%. So most of you out there are saying that it does need some work. Love to hear from the people who think they're doing great and what they've done to inspire that trust. So if you could share with us in the chat some of your comments about what you think you've done that's really helped, that would be super useful. And feel free to put your questions and chat in and we will take them all as we go through this discussion. So thanks for sharing that. So now that we know that the science is helping us a bit, how can we reboot that whole definition of feedback to amplify trust? Because, you know, feedback and other dirty words, it's so well, I remember reading that title and going, yes, it is a dirty word, isn't it? When somebody gives you feedback, you can feel the back of your neck sort of, it has that awful sense about it. So how do you flip it and amplify trust through feedback?
Tamara, you want to take this one? It's like when we were writing this book, you know, I was humbly following her lead, but she was adamant. It's like, you know what? We need to redefine. How do you redefine a word? I think about this a little bit when I talk about it. My niece a few years ago said something like, this was pre-COVID, said something like, oh, Auntie, you know, you're really sick, this and that and the other. I'm like, I'm kind of, you know, of a certain age where sick wasn't a good, no, I'm not sick. I just have allergies. It's just a cold. What? And she was like, no, that means sick. That means good. That means awesome. And I'm like, how did the word sick change for an entire generation and everybody else knows that? And now it's cool to be sick. If you're sick, it's good. I mean, that's where Tamara was going with feedback. It's like, we got to flip the whole thing. So I would love it if you would share the definition of what we think feedback should be. Why?
Yeah, so Laura's got it up here, but our definition, clear and specific information that's sought or extended with the sole intention of helping individuals, groups, or relationships improve, grow, or advance. I think so often when we think about feedback, to your point, Aisling, it's a negative, you know, there's this phantom word that floats in front of it, negative feedback. You know, I'm going to give you some feedback. Well, then negative is floating in there and in our brains and it's almost like at the tip of our tongues.
Right.
And it's so interesting because I've been paying so much attention to this now that even when I talk to new groups and introduce this, they always feel like they have to qualify the feedback. It's positive feedback or it's negative feedback. It's constructive feedback or it's blah, blah, blah.
Critical.
There's
Yeah.
all these words we use. And because then we're trying to, and then in the end, that positive feedback we completely ignore, and all we do is focus on the negative or constructive feedback. That's where all of our energy goes. And so in my fantasy world, in my dream world, we get rid of all of that and we lean into this definition, because what we're saying here is it's about helping, not hurting. And if that feedback hurts, it's not feedback, it's criticism, it's something else. And we don't need to qualify it anymore if we adopt this definition, because what we're saying is feedback is there. It may be something that says, hey, why don't you try this instead of that, because I think you'll get further. But it's still helping. It's moving people in a forward direction. It's moving people towards their growth, their potential, their dreams, whatever it is, it's moving them forward. And if we're giving feedback that's taking people back, that's taking them, taking them down, that's not feedback. That's something else. And, I got into, Laura's right, I was adamant about redefining this, because when I wrote the performance management book, I literally tried to edit the word feedback out because I knew it was so negative. And then later I realized we can't edit it. It's in our DNA. We say that word like 6 times a day. Start counting. And so how do we create a new definition that helps us reimagine what this means and helps us take all the goodness in it and let go of all the fear and the pain that we've kind of attached to that word in the past?
Yeah, it's so interesting because we had some clients in the beginning. They wanted to separate out, you can give feedback on Tandem, but they wanted to go, I want a block for positive feedback and a block for constructive feedback.
Yeah.
So in the early days, we gave it to them.
Yeah.
But what we noticed is users didn't use the block for constructive feedback. They just gave all of their feedback, even if some of it was constructive, in the top block, which was the beginning, the opening of it. Because we don't talk like that. We don't go, here's some positive feedback for you and here's some negative. It's just not how we, deliver feedback to each other. But there's loads of feedback pouring in here that I want to capture as we go. So Aoife's telling us feedback is a gift, or it should be. And Lisa tells us, I think this definition is so powerful. It's game changing. Niamh shared with us, and Niamh McNamara shared with us, they reimagined our approach to performance management. They removed ratings, focused on building the team, collaboration, regular check-ins, regular recognition, but also building the organization feedback muscle by providing the space to practice. So she's obviously one of the people who's got the trust factor. One of the 6% there. Yeah, that's a nice one. Kay tells us, I'm a believer in phantom pain. I support packing up the word feedback once and for all. And phantom pain, it'll never go away. Okay, and here we've got Niamh again telling us we're not great, but early sentiments suggest we're on the right path. People feel more empowered and engaged on the overall journey. Christina is telling us feedback is breakfast of champions. Oh my gosh, this keeps going. We're not going to get through. I'm going to ask you a question because Dr. Mary Collins here is asking us, love to hear of any models or frameworks of how to build trust in virtual teams. So relevant right now, right? Any thoughts, ladies?
Well, I'll throw a little bit in there, and then I'm sure Laura has better ideas. But, I think in the end, trust is all about relationships, right? That it comes in those little tiny moments in which we connect and that we show empathy and interest and those types of things. So I think we have to be more proactive when we're in a virtual world, because it's easy to get in a call and just jump right to business, or we're all on these types of events way too much today, and so we tend to I don't want to do one more call or one more thing. But what I think we need to do is, if we're in these types of events, start with something that is just checking in on people, that's just personal, that's just tuning into the humanness of all of us, and that we're all going through this experience together, and being, sort of open and transparent in that, and talking about it. I think that is a good thing. One thing I've been doing lately is this is a call out to our younger people who are just joining the workforce. You know, we have these classes of people the last 2 years who've come into the workforce in this virtual world, and they are hurting because they are not getting the same kinds of relationships you get when you come to the office and you sit with your buddy and they tell you the stories and the, you know, all that sort of thing. So I've started to be very proactive in reaching out to some of those people and just doing half an hour, and I call them walk and talks because it's like we've done too much of this. So I'm going to get on my cell phone and with my dogs, and we're going to talk, and you can ask me any stupid question you want to ask, right? So I think we have to do those types of actions and think about those different segments of people, you know, who's living alone, who's in your ecosystem, and what are the things that you need to do that tune into their situation. And I think we have to be a lot more proactive right now because those happy occurrences just aren't happening, and people are feeling them.
Yeah, I love everything Tamara said, and two other things that we're advocating with virtual teams right now, and I love that you asked that. The camera on, remember at the beginning of this, was like, you can't see each other, you can't connect, you can't be with each other. Turning the camera off sometimes is appropriate. Letting the virtual teams off this, you know, constant scrutiny of me. Test with your teams. Sometimes they are more open and honest and able to speak without looking at each other. So we're testing that. The wheel you see in front of you too, this is a little team practice that we've been working on, and it's really valuable. It comes up where Tamara said, you know, connect with the human. We get on these calls, we're getting them down to 45 minutes, so we're off video, but taking the time to check in as a human at the beginning of the day or at the beginning of the team call. What we do is we use a wheel like this, or the great author who wrote Permission to Feel has a mood meter. And what we do is we show it at the beginning of a team meeting, and just as a check-in to say in the chat, 2 words today to describe how you're feeling right now. What's your day like? We don't get into it, and we give them 2 because you know what? I don't always feel faithful. I might feel rage and sexy at the same time. You know, I mean, this one's a little, I don't like this one for business.
You got one on your wheel.
Yeah, but because people, and then you know what? You don't have to discuss it or go into it, but you just check in. It's like, how are you feeling today? Great. Thanks for sharing. It gets a little bit of that vulnerability and that humanness into the day because I can't see you. I don't know how you're doing. So those are just kind of a couple little tips lately to try with your virtual teams.
I like that. I really like that. Olabimpi is also agreeing with you there, Laura. She said, fully agree with the camera off. Tested and tried it. It helps. Some people are not comfortable with their space, even with filters. Some are self-conscious. It's so true, isn't it? You're exposing your whole background and world and wobbly lamp and the whole works all in the one place. Yeah.
We all got over that. And it's like, okay, maybe cameras on aren't the right thing. Test it with your team. See what makes them comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've done a little bit with some of our teams of sort of side working too. I don't know if anybody's tried that, where to Laura's point, you turn the cameras off, you're still on, you're working on things, but you can still say, hey, what do you think if we do that? Like, you know, if you've got a team thing happening. And we've found that for some people, it's just really nice because instead of getting pinged by a bunch of different, you know, texts or messages saying, hey, you know, you just ask the question, but then go back to what you're working on. And
interesting.
I think we have to be creative.
Yeah, we sure do.
Upping the frequency of conversation, feedback, and I think this is a great place to talk about the other concept that Tamara created, which is the fine art of noticing. When we're virtual, we're not in observation mode. We can't observe what's going on, and taking the time to call out excellence, to notice what's going on, and to be very frequent and focused about it, it's important. It's important to have little drips of feedback and drips of communication, you know, kind of a steady drip rather than a quarterly review or maybe even a quarterly check-in. But talk a little bit about FAN, Tamara, and why that kind of concept is important virtually or anytime.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably fairly obvious when you look at our definitions and you look at the energy that we have, that this isn't about judgment or evaluation, right? What we are really asking people to think about is, what are you noticing? And recognizing that what you're noticing is through your own filter. And so being able to offer that to someone and say, I'm noticing this. I'm noticing you're having an amazing impact and you seem kind of worn out, but what's happening for you, right? So being able to just notice, but not, ascribe a judgment or anything to that, but just being able to offer that builds trust, because, I can think of a lot of times where I, in the past, offered a judgment and then later came back and said, ignore everything I said because it was completely wrong, right? Like, so my good buddy, Alan Bergita, who was my partner at People Firm, the very first project he and I ever worked on together, Alan's energy is completely different than mine. He's kind of the turtle that wins the race. And the first project we did,
Alan.
I said, he'll remember this. I said, Alan, this was my review, our project review. I said, Alan, I just think you need more energy. I think you need to do blah, blah, blah. And I gave him all this like stupid advice that was all me, like my filter, right? It was all my, like, you should show up like me. I think it was like a month later when I realized the magic of Alan Bergita, I sat down and said, ignore everything I said because it was all wrong. And I have to tell you, Aisling, it's probably one of the first times I learned, this was years and years ago, it's probably one of the first times I learned truly like my own filter and how biased it was towards my own perspectives, right? And it made me get hopefully a little bit better at pausing before I started to put out my own truth versus really kind of just recognizing, what was really going on.
Yeah, I'm a little obsessed with your fan model. I just love it as one of the most freshest and easiest and workable feedback models out there. And I think what it does as well is it cuts through. I know when I go into clients, a lot of them have ingrained that thing of, if you're giving feedback, come up with 2 to 3 examples of where you saw that behavior at play. So, evidence-based feedback, which can hold you back from saying what you're really thinking. And hold that person back from a bit of development or growth that they may need. So FAN is just a lovely way of breaking up and going, it's okay to give feedback on just something you've noticed, that it's your observation. It's not, you're not telling them it's good or bad. It's just, I observed this in the meeting. I observed people, that you went about it this way. And it's a lovely way, I think, of freeing people up away from the evaluation, the judgment style feedback into a much more fresh, comfortable, easy feedback as well.
And tying it back to trust, Aisling, because once you offer something you've noticed, it leads to the conversation.
Yes.
And the conversation is where you build the trust. So, years and years ago when Susan Scott wrote Fierce Conversation, I can't even say that word.
Fierce Conversations.
she said the relationship is the conversation. And that's one of the quotes I have always loved because she's right. And so when we notice, it opens the conversation. And also I think the noticing is in the moments. And, whether you're talking about culture change, relationships, anything meaningful, it's in the moments. It's not in the events.
Yes.
And when you think about your life and things that changed it, I will bet dollars to donuts it was in the moments, not in the events. So
yes. And tying it back to trust, I want to give our Paul Zach again, the neuroscience that I can't wait to meet him, but I know he would want to stick a needle in my arm to measure my oxytocin, and I'm just not about that. But here's an amazing thing, because we're talking about individual relationships, but he also has a hypothesis that so conversation starts that oxytocin release, not only in the person receiving, right, but the person giving, because the conversation inspires the trust. But he's doing studies now that believes that that interaction can actually be reciprocal, right? That trust can be contagious, and it will create that contagion inside your organization. So that sounds a little woo-woo, but one relationship, one conversation at a time, that trust starts to build if we start to ingrain these habits and these different ways of operating. It can really, I mean, they are predicting that, it can actually increase oxytocin. I can influence it in you. And that's pretty phenomenal.
It is amazing. I'm a big believer in that trust begets trust. And we see it even, when we bring Tandem in and people start to exchange feedback and it becomes that two-way thing. We see trust going up on the engagement scores because I'm giving you feedback, you're giving me feedback, and now we're getting more comfortable giving each other feedback so we can push it a little bit more and it doesn't all have to be high-fiving. Now we're a bit more comfortable to go deeper and the trust deepens because we're comfortable to say to each other, you know what, I think you didn't quite nail that. And it's okay because you've built up enough of these feedback moments that, I've given you that 5 feedbacks. It's okay to give you one that's maybe not so positive, that 5-to-1 ratio that we talk about as well.
Well, because that person now knows that you're in it with them, right? This isn't about you judging them or trying to put them in a box or anything. It's just, I'm here with you. And I'm, this is what we just experienced. So let's, because none of us are ever perfect, right? We talk about flipping the switch from prove to improve, right? We have to quit trying to prove to everything to everybody and to ourselves, but just say, hey, we're always improving. Like we're constantly,
a work in progress.
And there's times where we're like, oh my gosh, that didn't go well, right?
And I think that's it. You're constantly depositing these moments so that you can deal with the tough stuff when it comes. I was talking to a leader, a very senior leader of an organization that finds itself topping the best company to work for pretty much every year. And he was saying, he really sees it in the leaders who invest time in building trust. They invest time in giving their people feedback, in giving moments and time to these people, that they almost have a license then to go and do the tough stuff. Because, but the leaders who haven't invested time in feedback and check-ins and knowing their people, when they go to do the tough stuff, it's really, really hard because they haven't built up enough trust to actually be trusted for the tough stuff. So it's a really interesting concept.
The tough stuff might not be feedback. That might be when you move into healthy conflict. But because you've got, and that's where, we're always like, some of this is feedback and sometimes it's conflict or it's, it's not feedback, and that's okay. Because if you've got that base of trust, then you can sustain a healthy conflict. I mean, and healthy teams need to have healthy conflict, but you've built that base of trust where then you can do, point counterpoint or a tough negotiation or see things from a different point of view and power through it in a healthy way because you've got that, I think you called it kind of the trust bank, Ashley.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
That Ashley, that makes me think, and I agree with Laura, could be feedback, could be conflict, it could be crisis, right? And having, I was a partner at Arthur Andersen and led through the Enron crisis. I launched a company in 2008 in the midst of the, worst economy ever and tried to keep 10 people busy at the very beginning of our lives. And those moments are where I've had to tap into that trust bank, right? That you are really looking for people to flex or to go with less or to, lean in to help survive, make sure that we all survive. And I think that trust is, that's the stuff that gets us through crisis. And I thought was interesting to bring that up is if you look at the data, and EY's done this amazing research on what the sentiment of what's happening, this global research. And what they're showing is that right now employees are trusting their organizations more. that we have led well through this crisis in a general sense. And so I think there's an opportunity to let this disruption allow us to go further, right? And I think it's increased employers' trust of employees, because that whole concern about productivity, well, guess what? People worked harder, right? And so I think we've started to realize I don't need to stare at people every day to make sure they're working, that if I provide connection and clarity, people will go further. So I feel like through this pandemic, we've kind of upped our trust quotient, and we have this opportunity to go further with transparency, more human-centered stuff, and there's so much momentum there. My hope is that we take it forward and we don't fall back, to some of these old ideas.
Yeah. Well, Abimpi's with us here on this. She says it's like making deposits into your team's trust account. So when it's time to do the tough stuff, it's easier. But I want to move us on into, well, if we're going to translate this into performance practices, if we are going to move this on, as you were saying, Tamara, and really double down on making sure trust is embedded into our practices and our processes, what kind of advice would you give to a HR head of performance or a CHRO who's thinking about moving on their performance management practices? What should we insert and what should we avoid to amplify trust in the process?
Yeah, so let me go back to what I said earlier, sort of about this. There's the systemic level and then there's the individual level. And, on the systemic level, I think we just need to, get rid of that black box I talked about. We need to create a process that is as transparent as possible. And that's going to depend, of course, on the courage and the boldness of the organization. But I think we can start to put a lot more power in the hands of our employees by creating a lot more clarity about role expectations and performance against those, and and then connecting rewards to more micro events. So we are connecting, hey, I see you having that impact and I'm recognizing it with this small micro reward, those types of things. That we kind of need to pull it all apart and say, how do we really connect to the human and make it as transparent as possible so employees feel like they can own it or influence it or make choices in it that are about them and understand the impact of those choices, right? So right now we don't give, a lot of the times we don't give that transparency. I don't know how to influence, as I said before, and I don't understand where I can turn a knob to make something different happen. I don't understand that. And so the more that we can open that up and give employees the power, the better. I think on the individual level, it goes back to feedback again. It goes back to really adopting that culture of feedback that's helping and not hurting, and creating opportunities for those moments to happen. I love the individual earlier talked about, building muscle and just creating that culture and really leaning into our definition, which means more often than not, you're helping people celebrate the impact and the recognition and the good stuff. Because what was so interesting to me, Laura talked about all the research we did for this book. We really looked into some leadership research by Zinger and Folkman. I'm a big Zinger Folkman fan. And they looked, at leaders and which leaders were most recognized for their leadership, which leaders led the most engaged organizations. And interestingly enough, they found that leaders that tended to be far more to the recognition side, like focused feedback that is about your strengths, what you've done well. Those were the leaders that had the most engaged groups, that had the highest recognition as leaders. And so, yes, there's times we need to help somebody if something's in their way, but I think what we don't do enough of is celebrate all the good things that are happening in the organization and all the impact and the hard work that people are doing. And if we just did more of that, that would create a lot more trust and a lot more, joy. I love that word joy that's on that slide, that trust slide, right? Like if we could do that.
Yeah, and back to the science, there was a study in the U.S. It was a U.S.-based company, but that, again, Paul Zak and his group did and said, most U.S.-based companies that want to increase that trust meter can focus on these two things: recognizing excellence frequently and often, like Tamara said, whether that's through feedback, whether that's through, our Tandem, whether that's through, more recognition programs, recognizing excellence and sharing information more transparently. So right now, whether that means sharing information on where the company's going, where your job stands. And again, Tamara's always been a proponent of helping people craft their own work, right? That mastery, autonomy, purpose, helping people in their roles craft, give them good purpose and direction, and give them a decent paycheck and get out of their way and let them be excellent. Kind of that crafting, those things, if we can focus our processes, those will lift the trust. If we can focus on recognizing excellence, sharing information more transparently and broadly, and allowing people, personal mastery in their work. Huge differences.
Huge, yeah. I'm reminded of, and I'm conscious of our time because we're nearly running out. So any last questions, please post into us. But I'm reminded of Simon Sinek. I was looking at him only, I think it was last week or so, and he was talking about trust is the thing that happens in between meetings, and I think that's such a valid thought, that actually the meeting is often straight to the task and on with the thing, but it's those little moments of feedback after the meeting or recognition in between, or those tiny little moments that actually build up the trust. But we've got to make time for that, don't we? I had a client, a newish client to us, and he's so converted on the idea of we need to build trust through feedback that he's cancelling one of his regular meetings so that people have time to give each other feedback, because it's the thing you don't make time for, isn't it? It's like the thing that happens after the meeting, but then you've no time, or so he's cancelling his meeting so that people can get on Tandem and just give each other feedback for that period of time, which is wonderful, I think.
Right? It's like, look at, he listened to the science, right? Recognize excellence and share information, whether it be feedback or more broadly and more frequently. Boom, he's doing it just by canceling one meeting a week, something, how beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's the consciousness of we've got to carve out time for the in-between meetings thing, because we are all on a back-to-back schedule, and it's very draining, and making sure that we're actually giving time for people to give each other feedback and to invest in it.
Well, and that's so important now, because Microsoft released this amazing report I think it was like last week, that looked at their Teams data and how much time people have spent in Teams over the last year, and it's like doubled. And so what's happened is we've just continued to add more and more to the calendar and trying to sort of manage our way through this process, and we've created less and less time. And I think not just time, but like mental space, right? Just less of that. And so I love that idea of canceling the meeting. We've had some of our clients who've done no meetings on Friday. Laura and I, of course, love our ideas of Feedback Friday, make that something that occurs at some sort of cadence, or no Monday morning meeting. Like, what can we do? That's hard when you're global or multi-time zone, but what can we do that just gives people that time to reflect, to share, to connect? I'm with you.
Here's my challenge as we end. There's 59 of us on this call. So after this call, think about someone that you haven't recognized their excellence, or you haven't reached out, and just 1 minute text, 1 minute email. There's my challenge.
Probably use Tandem if you're a client.
If you've got your Tandem app, absolutely. Right now, 59 of us, we can start that revolution right there, Tamara.
Challenge accepted from your mom, Laura. We're in.
My mouth is on.
I hate bringing this conversation to an end because I'm enjoying it far too much, and I know I could spend the next hour talking to you insightful ladies about more, and we haven't even got to Catherine's question, which is a really important one, but we've run out of time, I'm afraid. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much. to use that word joyous. It has been joyous. It's always joyous talking to you about these topics because you're so well researched and so insightful on it all. Any finishing parting words to our guests? So much goodness. Thanks for such a great session from Jenny. Thanks very much, Jenny. Much appreciated. Any final words from you guys before we wrap up?
Everyone stay safe and well, and we'll come back and let's do this together soon. We'll be all together soon.
Sounds wonderful. Hopefully in person at some point. All right. Thank you so much.
I just say thanks for being here as well. And please connect with us on LinkedIn. And Catherine, if you connect with me there, I'll try to answer that question via LinkedIn so we don't lose it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks so much,
Thank
everyone,
you.
for joining. Over to you,
Okay.
Meg.
Have a good
Thank
evening.
you. Thank you both for joining as well. And just a final note to say that the next episode of our Tandem Talks is on Tuesday, the 25th of May, and we'll be joined by Lorraine Rafter. So please follow us on LinkedIn. I've just dropped the link in the chat box so that you can keep in touch with the registration details for that. So thank you everyone for joining. Thanks to our wonderful speakers. It was a great session, and have a good day. Bye.
Here.
Bye.